Hello, my name is Sanjay Sarma, and I'm the Vice President for Open Learning at MIT. It's a great pleasure to give this lecture. It's a great class, and really excited to do this. I want to talk a little bit about digital learning, but let me start by talking about the brain, which you'll hear about from other colleagues as well, such as John Gabrielli, the eminent cognitive neuroscientist. So we have learned a lot about how the brain forms memories. We know, for example, that the brain forms memories by taking input for about 8 to 10 minutes. Beyond 8 to 10 minutes, what happens is that the hippocampus, where the memories are formed, which helps form the memories, its activity changes and the brain's activity changes. And the brain goes into a mode which is called mind wandering. Funny as it may seem, that's actually the technical term for it. And our ability to absorb information drops after that. So the ideal chunk of lecture time is about 8 to 10 minutes. Unfortunately, most lectures today are in the range of 45 minutes, an hour. I mean, imagine how long it takes to set up a lecture. It takes 10 minutes to get everyone to sit down and get going. To interrupt a lecture after 10 minutes just wouldn't work. So 8 to 10 minutes is an optimal time, but cannot be done in person. But in fact, this little lecture is going to be 8 to 10 minutes. And the reason is the digital modality actually benefits us and benefits from short-term lectures, short lectures. And so that's sort of a single piece of a vast, complex array of science that we're learning about the science of learning, and a little piece of what we can now implement in digital learning. Here's another thing. So let's say you learn for about 10 minutes. At the end of 10 minutes, what should we do? Should we take a break? Should we perhaps reread the material? What should we do? What the science tells us is, and it's called the testing effect, it's also called retrieval practice. The science tells us that the best thing a student can get at the end of an 8 to 10 minute lecture is Q&A on that topic. So questions about, hey, you just studied history. What was the date of that event? What was the reason for that event, for that war, for example? And it turns out that the retrieval of memories from short-term memory promotes long-term learning. Again, can you imagine doing that in a regular lecture format? It's very difficult because you have 50 students in a classroom or 30 and a professor teaching, and to individuate and ask questions of each student is really impossible. So we choose not to do it in a regular classroom. But as you will see in this lecture, in MOOCs, we can do it. We do 8-minute lectures, and at the end of it, you have Q&A. And over time, they will become adaptive and so on. We're not quite there yet, but it'll happen. But even the Q&A that follows is good for turning short-term memories into long-term memories. Here's another little insight. We know now for a fact that when you learn something, you will very likely forget it. There's a convenient assumption that professors make in teaching and teachers make in teaching, that the teacher holds the pen and the student's brain is a sheet of paper. And all the teacher has to do is write on that sheet of paper and declare victory. But what we now know is that actually the model we should use is that the student is forming a model of the world. It's like a plant growing. And we should be watering the plant when the plant needs water, not when it's convenient for us. We should be giving the plant fertilizer when it needs fertilizer, or sunlight when it needs sunlight, not when it's convenient for us. So what that means is that learning is very personal, and there's a whole emerging space of individuated or personalized learning, which we can do online, but very difficult to do in a lecture. We also know that when you learn something, you will forget it. And it turns out, and forgetting is natural, so the business of writing on the student's brain and then declaring victory doesn't work. Everyone will forget. But forgetting is actually an important step in really learning something, because just as you're about to forget something, if you're reminded of it, you'll remember it much longer. And that is called spaced retrieval. We have known this fact for a mere 100 years, and we don't use it because we can't in a regular lecture, but we can do it online or in digital education. In fact, software programs like Duolingo and I believe Rosetta Stone actually use it because they're digital, but we don't use it in the classroom because we can't. Now, it doesn't mean that everything can be done digitally, and in this course, We can use all these amazing techniques to improve learning. But there are some things you cannot teach digitally. I mean, take welding. You could learn the physics of welding digitally, but until you see or do welding, until you can smell it and feel the heat and hear the noise, you really don't know welding. I certainly wouldn't want to be operated upon by a surgeon who's learned only digitally, or flown on a plane by a pilot who has never actually flown a plane. The modern airline industry would not be what it is today were it not for flight simulators. And flight simulators let pilots practice on the ground, where it's cheaper, before they go in the air. You certainly need to apprentice in the air. But the point is that digital education only takes you so far, but it takes you that far and does well. By no means are we saying that in-person education, apprenticeship, hands-on is not important. If anything, we're saying that if you can do more digitally, it leaves more time for the precious seconds, minutes, hours that we interact to make them very effective. So what we do in digital learning today is we apply all these principles. Our MOOCs are based on these principles, as you've probably seen, short videos, assessments, and so on. And as and when you want, the other advantage of digital education is, you can't pause a professor in a regular classroom. Professors do not want to be interrupted, most of them. But you can pause a video. You can replay it. If you miss something, if your attention wanders, you can replay it. You can listen to it on the subway. You can watch it while you're, waiting for something. So these are all great advantages of digital learning, and they particularly apply in the context of the future of work. If we think about people learning throughout their lives while they're working a job, while they're in a car or a subway going to another job, digital learning is a modality that really fits in with the rise of podcasts, smartphones, etc. And actually, there's another wonderful thing that happens, which is if we can interleave learning with work, then you have the wonderful gift of context. Because when we learn something, if you know you're learning it, and you know precisely where you're going to apply it, the affirmation, the confirmation of the learning is much greater. And the learning is much more permanent and much more robust and reliable. You can imagine, for example, a scenario maybe 3 years from now. So let's say a Lufthansa aircraft lands in Boston at Logan Airport, and you are an engineer, and you are called in to do some standard maintenance on the engine. So you walk up to the engine, you're wearing a virtual reality, augmented reality system. It's giving you cues about the engine. It tells you when the engine was last maintained. But as you do that, it says, by the way, next year we are changing to this new engine type. And if you want to learn about it, just wink. And I will give you a little dose of knowledge on your subway ride home.